When you're manic, you kind of think unrealistically. You're probably pretty mean to people, like just rude, and you say things that you may have thought in the past, but never really intended on, revealing. So, manic episodes have really devastated my life in many different ways. It's resulted in me getting fired from jobs, me quitting jobs, me losing 450,000 in a matter of 15 minutes, me losing my coaching position as a collegiate women's rugby coach. But, there's also some good things that come from Mania. My book was actually started when I was manic because, I didn't care what people thought. And, I'd always been ashamed of my mental illness. And, over a decade, I had confused a lot of people. But again, when you're manic, you don't care what people think. So I just started telling people my life story. So it's a double-edged sword for sure.
Welcome to your Wordless podcast, the space where we redefine success, self-worth, and transformation. I am Nick Nieras, the soul-centered architect of transformation, helping you unlock your highest potential and build a legacy beyond limits. Now, whether it is self-mastery, career breakthroughs, or wealth creation, this is where change begins. Now let's dive in. Thank you again for saying yes.
Thanks, of course.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty of things, can you first share with us what was it like growing up as a Tyler Kania?
Uh, I had a good childhood. My parents were wealthy and white and educated. And I grew up in a small town, a farm town in Connecticut where, the only restaurant was at a car dealership. But, we didn't have a high school. So I went to high school in an inner city that was once dubbed Heroin Town, USA. It was the lowest ranked school in the state of Connecticut. And the reason for that was because we had more Spanish speaking students than English speakers. So we had a daycare at the school for our students' kids. And, I definitely learned a lot. Like, I didn't have great college placement resources like other schools might have, but I learned about different cultures and people that came from different backgrounds than I was from. I was captain of the football team, and we called ourselves La Familia. And, sports transcend the color barriers. So, when you put on the helmet, everyone was the same. And, it was really powerful to learn from these people that, didn't really have what I had. Then I went to college and played rugby for Central Connecticut State. My position was fly half, which is a lot like quarterback in football. Like, you call the plays and do all the passing and kicking. My team was really good. We won 3 championships, and I got recruited to play for a premier rugby team that had guys from Team USA and people from around the world representing national teams like Fiji. And I had big ambitions for the sport. I wanted to play at the highest level, but, when I was 24, as you mentioned, I ruptured my patellar tendon for the first time. It's an injury that happens once for every 147,000 human years. So to actually do it twice, it's got odds that are kind of like discovering life on other planets.
What? Okay, my first question. How did that happen? Was it during the one of the games?
The first one happened in practice. I was running with the ball and I was cutting from right to left, and someone grabbed me from behind. And when you rupture your patellar tendon, your knee goes into your quad. So my knee
Oh
went
my
up,
gosh.
you know, high into my leg, and my leg was just dangling there.
Oh my God. Okay. Okay, that's pretty descriptive. So what happened after that?
That was actually the first experience I had with mania as an undiagnosed bipolar. Manic episodes happen when a bipolar person has been dealt trauma in their life. And so you effectively go insane. It feels great when you're manic. You feel righteous and powerful, and your mind works really fast. You don't sleep. You're focused on goals and stuff like that. You're exceptionally creative, but you also don't see risk, and, you can really screw things up. So With that particular injury and that manic episode, I quit my six-figure job in cybersecurity sales. I quit rugby. I was broken up with, and I moved to Idaho and kind of just adventured across the western U.S. states for several months trying to figure out what was going on in my brain. And I went on a bunch of different adventures. Almost died in the Grand Canyon. Almost died in the Teton Mountains. But eventually I moved back to Connecticut and got another job in cybersecurity sales at a startup.
As somebody who I have had one at least friend who has willingly shared her experience of a manic episode, but still I'm a third party looking in, and I want to know how can someone support a person who's going through that, and what are the telltale signs?
Yeah, I mean, it can be kind of hard for intervention. When you're manic, you don't know you're manic. So when you're manic, you kind of think unrealistically. You're probably pretty mean to people, like just rude, and you say things that you may have thought in the past, but never really intended on, revealing. So, manic episodes have really devastated my life in many different ways. It's resulted in me getting fired from jobs, me quitting jobs, me losing 450,000 in a matter of 15 minutes, me losing my coaching position as a collegiate women's rugby coach. But, there's also some good things that come from Mania. My book was actually started when I was manic because, I didn't care what people thought. And, I'd always been ashamed of my mental illness. And, over a decade, I had confused a lot of people. But again, when you're manic, you don't care what people think. So I just started telling people my life story. So it's a double edged sword for sure.
Are you stuck in a job that you don't love, feeling like you're meant for more? It is not in your head, it is in your soul. I am Nick Yaras, and I help high achievers like you break free from burnout, rewire self-doubt, and build a life aligned with purpose through coaching, hypnotherapy, and soul activation. Because let's face it, real wealth isn't just about money, it is about aligned and happy heart, mind, and soul. Now, remember, you are worthy and you are enough. Let's transform your life together. Visit www.thenickyaras.holisticlifestyle.com to begin. And your book, can you share with us what is in your book and why should people read it?
Yeah. The Maniac with No Knees is a memoir. It covers, kind of 10 years of my life going through undiagnosed bipolar, good things like making $250,000 at the age of 26, leading a college women's rugby team to a conference championship, things like that. It also contains a lot of adventures and paranoia where I thought my Amazon Echo was listening to my business deals, and I thought, I thought that my car was stolen by the Boston Mafia and they were out to get me, and a bunch of other stuff like that. Eventually, I attempted suicide twice, returned to rugby a week after my first suicide attempt. And then I was institutionalized at a mental hospital where I was finally diagnosed with bipolar, given mood stabilizers to stabilize me. And I met a lot of people in the mental hospital that were suffering a lot worse than me. People with schizophrenia, narcissists who required being tied down to a bed for medication. My roommate had aphasia, which is when a trauma prevents you from talking very much. And I was able to get him to talk for the first time in several weeks. And, we formed this friendship. And it can be a really lonely place when you're there. You effectively lose your freedom when you're institutionalized. You can't go outside. There's no group activities. The food stinks. But it was really nice to make a friendship with him, and it really meant a lot to me. I went to outpatient therapy where I finally got to see the campus. I got to, um, you know, eat sugar again and drink coffee and go to group therapy where, people with other traumas were there to share their story and, you know, tell me that, I can get better and I can recover. And so it was a really powerful experience. And I wanted to do something about it, but, I didn't know how. So I got my life back together after being institutionalized. I got a job at the largest cybersecurity company in the world. and I was working hard to get back on the rugby field. And by last spring, I was in the best shape of my life, finally ready to prove to everybody what I could do. But my second game, I ruptured my patellar tendon again, went manic,
Oh God, I'm so
started that
sorry.
book.
Wow. Okay. That was last spring, so that means September 2024 or around that time?
April 2024.
April 2024. Wow. And okay, there's so many questions in my head, but I guess this is just me being curious. What are the few things that people don't know about, you know, the illnesses that you just mentioned, bipolar, schizophrenia, and, all these other things that they actually don't know, but once you're diagnosed, you actually okay, you come to know that it is not that. What are the myths, I would say? Hi, I'm Nick Nieras, your host of the Your Worthless podcast. Now, if these real raw stories hit home, don't wait. Please follow, like, and subscribe my Spotify and YouTube. For bite-sized inspirational reels, follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. Don't wait. Your transformation starts today. Thank you, and bye for now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's a couple things, and you can look at the glass half empty or you can look at the glass half full. From a half empty perspective, you know, mania can be empowering, but it can ruin your life. Depression is the worst of the two sides of bipolar. I had a lot of suicidal thoughts. When I would walk my dog down the street, I would see illusions of myself hanging from trees. I would keep rope in my room. And thinking about suicide was a really warm feeling to me. It brought me comfort. It brought me comfort to look at my charging cable on my computer and think that I could, die in 45 seconds or less and relieve myself of all the pain that I was in. So it can be really tough to deal with suicidal depression. I had a couple of attempts, and the first one, I put a noose around my neck and looked outside, and the clouds parted and the sun came out. And I realized at that moment that my friend was getting married the next day, and I didn't want to ruin his big day. So I kept going. And then the second attempt was I had moved to Memphis for a new coaching job and had a panic attack and just started taking dozens and dozens of pills. And I overdosed and I had severe serotonin syndrome and I had to be hospitalized for a few days. And so that was really rough. But like I said, there's a glass half full perspective to bipolar and mental illnesses as well. It's no wonder that so many influential people in society have bipolar. Winston Churchill, Ernest Hemingway, Vincent van Gogh, Selena Gomez. Bipolars have a heightened level of creativity, curiosity, empathy, and objectivity. When you're manic, like I said, you don't care what other people think and you think a million miles per hour, and it can be a really powerful, thing that can take over you. So for all of our curses, we have blessings too, which is important to think about. And if people read my book and see how accomplished I would be for like a couple of years before something would come and crash it all down, you'll realize, yeah, bipolar people are special.
I just want to acknowledge you for being so brave and vulnerable and candid with your story. You must have done a lot of work on yourself to get to where you are right now and in the space that you're at and you're in. And so, Tyler, how do you stay grounded? Like the fact that you could stand objectively on the side and just observe what was happening and actually talked about it to other people. How did you get from before to now? And what do you do to get
Yeah,
there?
well, a couple of things. Well, I tell people with mental illness that there's three things that you need in your life to find stabilization. You need a community to belong to that makes you feel okay with being yourself and makes you feel okay with asking for help. And, that brings you joy and you can kind of just relax around, certain people. We're social creatures, and depression can make you disassociate yourself from the world pretty easily. Turn your cell phone off for weeks and just stay in your room. But, like with the wedding the day after my first attempt with suicide, you know, all of these little things that people did for me meant so much more. People getting me a drink at the bar or people dancing with me on the dance floor. Those things meant a lot. And of course, rugby is a great community. I've built a great community around my writing. So that's important. The second thing is, you need a goal to wake up to every morning and push you to get better, something that can have you focused on the future and not just, worry about your thoughts. I went through some incredible traumas, even writing this book. And, the book kept me focused on my future and not just wallowing in misery. And then the third thing is medication. And medication is tough to grapple with for psychiatric illnesses because it's tough to prescribe. But I cycled through over a dozen medications. One of them was an early stage trial antipsychotic that made me gay for 3 months. And so that was really horrific to deal with while I was also dealing with suicidal depression. But eventually I got the help I needed. I got the medication I needed. Lithium has saved my life and it's stabilized me. So if you do suffer from a mental illness, just you need to get help.
And the community that you're a part of now, who are they?
Well, first of all, there's rugby, and I'm still recovering from my knee injury last spring, but it's important for me to be around the team. When you join a rugby team, you have 30 new friends right away, and you know, rugby brings me a lot of confidence. So even though I can't play, I go and I help out and do some coaching responsibilities, some film review, and it's something to do a couple times a week. And then the second community that I've built has been around my writing. My first draft of my book was published directly to Instagram. And since then, I publish one short story every day, one page short story, which is going to be a collection that will be my second book. And, those people on Instagram have really appreciated what I have to say to the world. It's connected me with a lot of other people that have mental illness, people that might work with those who have mental illness and see a different side of the coin from what they're used to. And so it's been really powerful to you know
I'm trying to be careful not to, ask the right questions here. Like, okay, so talk to us about the losses that you had with cryptocurrency. Like in 15 minutes, you lost what? $500,000? That's uh
yeah.
that's a lot of money.
Yeah, so after I had attempted suicide for the first time and went to that wedding, a week later I attended a party for an old rugby friend of mine. And I hadn't played rugby in 4.5 years. I had cut out all of my friends from rugby out of my life, thrown away all my rugby stuff. I didn't want to be reminded of it because I had ambitions to go pro and then it didn't work out. And so, at that party, they convinced me to go to a game, an exhibition match the following week. They said that our old college coach was now their men's team coach. And so I went, showed up in jeans and started talking to the coach's wife who had given me so much confidence in college. And she was like, Tyler, you got to go back out there. You're great. You got to play again. And I don't really know how it happened, but with like 10 minutes left, I entered the field. An injury happened and borrowed someone's cleats and rugby shorts. And I ended up assisting the game winning score the first time I touched the ball. And so it was so crazy, having attempted suicide a week before. And then all these new friends are patting me on the back and stuff. So I got back into rugby. I worked hard and, I was going to start in the fall, but I got another injury. And the next day, a coaching position opened up for the Eastern Connecticut women's rugby team, the head coaching role. They were a week away from their first game, and without a coach, they were going to have to forfeit their season. So I stepped up. I pulled a bunch of all-nighters to get accredited as a coach. And, I really found a great community. And we built it up pretty good. I worked so hard, and the girls seemed to love me. We weren't an instant success. We lost 31-0 to Tufts University. But then after that game, we studied film relentlessly and went back to their home field in the conference championship and beat them 29-10. So 6 months after a suicide attempt, I was all of a sudden this successful college rugby coach. And it was great. And the girls wanted to keep playing. So, I sold some of my cryptocurrency and bought them $3,000 worth of balls and gears and books and tournament fees. And we entered a tournament at
Wow.
the end of November and kept playing for an extra month, which was great. But once the off season started, I got kind of lonely. I started a cryptocurrency company. It was basically a decentrally owned and operated rugby team that was governed through NFTs provided to like people with certain rugby accreditations so that decision making wouldn't be just held to the head coach. It would be diversified across multiple stakeholders. And I got invited to the largest cryptocurrency conference in North America. I went Manic while I was out there, pitched my idea to venture capitalists and technologists, even Elon Musk's brother Kimball. And Mania can be a good tool when when you're doing something like pitching to a venture capitalist in a bar at 2 a.m. Just because you think so fast, you talk so fast, and I made a lot of connections while I was out there. And when you're manic, you have grandiose thinking. You almost feel like you're God. And I, was convinced that I was going to be famous and going to be on Sports Center and land a seven-figure investment for my you know cryptocurrency venture. And so I went home and I trusted this guy online with the secret phrase to my cryptocurrency wallet. And yeah, yeah, you're not thinking when you're manic. And
Right.
he stole $450,000 from me in 15 minutes. Um, my parents weren't around, so I just pretty much started drinking. And the next day, I had to coach the women's rugby team, and I was still insane. I was yelling at them for the first time ever. I was disorganized and disoriented, and the girls were appalled at my behavior. What I didn't know was that their old coach, who had left them for, a more profitable position, was trying to form a coup to get his position back at Eastern.
Mm.
And so the leadership group on the team sat me down for a meeting, and three out of the four of them just berated me for an hour without giving me any opportunity to really talk or explain, like, look, I just lost my life savings. I don't really know what's going on with my mind. And I was really confused with the way they were treating me because, again, they weren't going to have a season without me. And, it wasn't just that they had a season, like, they had a great season. And, I was really distraught after that meeting. And I did something that is really unfair to put a young woman in that position. I told a girl on the team that I was thinking about suicide and I didn't know what I would do if I lost the job. And so the next day, the university opened up an investigation into me. And, I knew that I hadn't broken any formal rules from the university, but I also knew that I had lost the support of my team. And, being fired, because if I was fired, then I wouldn't be able to get another coaching job. So I just resigned, and that ensued a 6 week period of time where, I didn't really leave my room. I didn't have my phone turned on. And that was when I was getting those illusions of myself hanging from trees and keeping rope in my room and stuff like that. But eventually that depression gave way to another manic episode. And I just figured that, well, it's going to be really embarrassing when all my friends find out that I lost this coaching job. So I better just find a new one to say that I left for, a good reason. And I got in my car and I just drove south. I stopped in Nashville, Tennessee, and played rugby with my old college roommate for a week. Even though I wasn't really on the team, they let me play fly half, which was really cool. And it was honestly just what I needed to like spend time with an old friend, when I was suffering. But while I was there, I found a coaching position opening in Memphis, and it was to coach U19 boys in the most dangerous neighborhood in America, Orange Mound, which is, riddled with gang violence. You can't really get out of your car at a gas station without having a gun. But I got the job, and I looked at it as a new opportunity to, be a mentor to kids who, were surrounded by gang violence and had incarcerated siblings. And, I was looking forward to, making a difference. But my fourth day there, like I mentioned before, I had this tremendous panic attack and, overdosed on medication and, went back home was hospitalized with severe serotonin syndrome. And, it was a month after that I got institutionalized.
What a journey, Tyler. I just want to say thank you again for sharing. So, what are you working on currently?
Yeah, I'm pretty busy right now. Like I
Okay.
said, I started publishing one-page short stories on Instagram. And after a couple months, I started to think, well, I'm going to have enough for a book pretty soon. And so I've got 99 stories. I've got a little more. I wrote about 200 stories, but I think the book has 99 right now. It's called 99 Stories in a Broken Pen. It's got a whole array of different topics, right? Like it covers suicide, mental illness, drug overdoses, but it also covers, family and friends and sports and politics. And, it's really made me get better at like focusing on making each sentence the best that I could possibly make. And so I don't know when it's going to come out. I'm not in a hurry to put it out because the Maniac with No Knees just came out in January. So I'm going to take my time. Besides that, like it's tough for an unknown author to make a lot of money writing. So I kind of found a niche with extended obituaries. So, writing 12-page life stories about, the deceased for their family members and friends and working with funeral homes. And so basically I interview 4 or 5 family members, a few friends, and, it can be a dark subject. So I always ask for a couple, funny stories to include. I think it's a fun thing to do. And, there's kind of two things where people spend money on and they don't really care about the costs, and that's marriages and funerals. Um, so, I'm hoping to, make it a big part of my writing career.
And you certainly has turned pain into purpose and I mean no excuses, right? Okay, so Tyler, I want to pivot to a self-worth question. Self-discovery is a journey that varies for each person. Now, what are some practical steps individuals can take to embark on this path and learn more about themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, I had spent years being ashamed of who I was. My closest friends didn't really know what I was going through at all. Some of my closest friends didn't even know I was bipolar until I started writing the book. It was really tough for me to confuse so many people for a decade and just have them wondering, what's going on with Tyler. I never really shared anything on social media. Like I said, I was hiding in the shadows. I didn't want people to know the real me. But once I finally came forward, and started writing the book and started publishing on Instagram, all I received was respect and admiration and people telling me how courageous I am. And I think it's a lot easier to be authentic with yourself and the people around you than it is to suffer in silence. Suffering in silence takes a lot of strength. And what I would say to, other people that are kind of hiding their illnesses, people aren't going to think that you're Frankenstein. They're probably going to like you more because you're honest about yourself, and everybody struggles with something. They might not have a mental illness, but they know struggle. And, people respect those who are just completely unwaveringly honest about themselves.
Thank you for that. So, what does your day to day look like?
It's different every day.
Okay.
I'm working hard to get back on the rugby field still. I lift weights and run pretty much every day. I usually write one short story a day, edit some of my old short stories, interview people for extended obituaries. But then, I'm also like interviewing for new sales jobs. Hopefully, I can get one pretty soon. And, I'll obviously continue writing after that. I have plans for at least a few more books. And, writing is like therapy to me. It's a mirror for your thoughts, and it's going to be a lifelong passion. And I have ambitions to, get into traditional publishers and have the world see my work. So now I'm just working towards that every day.
And you will get there for sure. I'll keep you in my prayers, Tyler. Thank you so much for stepping up and showing up. What is your heart's greatest wish?
There's some statistics out there, and I don't know if they're true or not, but one of them says that 90% of bipolars who get married end up divorced. And that's a harrowing statistic. And, I've had trouble with relationships in my own life. And I'd love to have a wife and kids one day, but, you know, I don't know if that's in the cards because of my illness. A book is something that is going to be there after I die. And it's a legacy and it's folklore, and it can almost fill that void of having a child. Not completely, but can at least preserve the memory of me once I go. So again, yeah, I'd love to have a family, but we'll see.
Well, you're putting your intention out there, and I believe in manifestation. So the universe is listening to you. So yeah, you heard it here first. So for those listening, you heard it. Who knows? We don't know. If you could create a quote right now for you to leave to the audience listening and the world as your legacy, what would it be?
A quote?
Yes, a quote.
I don't know. I guess I'll go back to what I said earlier, and that's the fact that bipolar people with mental illness, have superpowers, and it's important to remember those things when you're struggling, because we're all blessed with something, and life can be really difficult. But if you focus on what God did give you, and not worry about the things He didn't give you, then you're going to be okay.
Okay. So how could people reach out to you?
Instagram's kind of my ground zero for putting all my work out there initially. My Instagram handle is Tyler underscore Kania. And yeah, if you give me a follow, you'll see, short stories. You'll see, the progress in my writing career, different events that I'm doing. But you'll also see highlights of my rugby career and, you know, things like that. So yeah, definitely give it a follow. You can also go to my website, tylerkania.com. Um, Check out my book, The Maniac with No Knees, on Amazon. And, you know, keep in touch because, I'm going to be putting out more work. And, that was my first book. And I think I did quite well with it. But, there was a lot that I didn't know about writing. And so my writing has definitely developed, with, this next book. And I think it'll continue to get better and better as I go.
Tyler, so any last message to our listeners before we wrap this interview?
No, I mean just be authentic with yourself, and you'll find that things will fall into pieces after you do so. And that's about it. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing this.
Yes, me too. And so that is a wrap on today's inspiring episode with Tyler Kania. Thank you for your wisdom, Tyler, and your dedication to continue to uplift those around you. And for our listeners, this has been Your Worthless. Read that again, the juxtaposition of your very soul. Now, if you've ever felt worthless, remember, you're not alone. Your soul chose to be here to matter. And for that reason alone, you are worthy. A huge thank you to you again, Tyler, and to all of you for listening. Until next time, I am Nick Nieras. Keep shining, keep growing, and always remember, you are worthy, you are enough. See you in the next episode. Thank you, Tyler, for your time.
Thank you.
Love this episode? Now, transformation doesn't end here. Head on to at holistic.lifestyle_with Nick, that is on my Instagram, or head on to my website, www.denigneraswholisticlifestyle.com for more info on my coaching framework, which is the Worthy, Authentic, and Abundant Framework, digital guides, and my upcoming events such as retreats and master classes and workshops. Now, I also do intuitive readings where we get to check on your soul path. And if you're also wanting to check on your energetic alignment, I have done that too. And I offer that kind of services. So, my question to you is, are you ready? Because I am. Let's create your lives together. Hi, Tyler. Good morning to you. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for saying yes to be interviewed today. I'd like to introduce myself to you formally and to all of the listeners tuning in for the first time and returning subscribers. My name is Nicolette. I am the creator for the podcast titled You're Worthless. Read that again, the juxtaposition of your very soul. So, hello everyone. We have Tyler Kania here with us. Tyler is a rugby player, coach, cybersecurity salesman, cryptocurrency entrepreneur, stonemason, painter, and writer from Columbia, Connecticut. Tyler suffers from bipolar I disorder, and his rugby career has been marred by the very rare and traumatic ruptured patellar tendon twice. He is an avid reader and writer, and his first book, Maniac with No Knees, is an exciting and introspective memoir that dives deep into the severity of his mental illness. Ooh, it is kind of deep. Welcome to the show, Tyler.